You didn't miss them. Your body just doesn't know what else to reach for. That's the part nobody tells you. Not your friends, not the internet, not even yourself. Because if you admitted that, it would mean this wasn't love. It would mean something inside you was trained. Let's not start at the beginning. The beginning is a lie. The smiles, the connection, the "I've never felt this way before" moment. That wasn't the truth. That was the hook. Start here instead. The first time something felt off. Not obvious, not dramatic. Just small. A delayed reply that lingered longer than it should. A tone that shifted slightly colder than before. A moment where you felt replaced, and your chest tightened. But you didn't leave. That moment right there, that's where the story actually begins. Tate, because something inside you didn't say, "This is wrong." It said, "This feels familiar." And familiarity is dangerous, because your brain doesn't chase what's good for you. It chases what it recognizes. You think you fell in love, but your nervous system found a pattern and followed it. Let's strip away the illusion, not gently, completely. You weren't drawn to them because they were perfect. You were drawn to them because they activated something already wired inside you, something unfinished, something unresolved, something you never questioned, because you thought it was normal. Think about it. Why them? Out of everyone, why did your attention lock onto that person? It wasn't random. It wasn't fate. It wasn't some cosmic alignment. It was recognition. They didn't feel new. They felt known. And that's what pulled you in. Not safety, not peace, not stability, but familiarity disguised as connection. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. You weren't responding to who they were. You were responding to how they made you feel. And how they made you feel wasn't new. It was a replay. Somewhere in your past, you learned that attention wasn't consistent, that warmth could disappear, that closeness could turn cold without warning, and without realizing it. You adapted. You became someone who waits longer, tolerates more, questions themselves first, stays, even when something feels wrong. Not because you're weak, but because you were trained to survive that pattern. So when they pulled away, you didn't step back. You leaned forward. When they became distant, you became more available. When they gave less, you gave more. And every time you did that, something inside you whispered, "This is how you keep them." But let's be clear about something. They didn't create this. They didn't need to, because it was already there. All they had to do was respond to it. And whether they realized it or not, they did. They noticed how quickly you adjusted, how fast you forgave, how easily you explained their behavior instead of questioning it. And slowly, the dynamic formed. Not all at once. Not in a way you could point to and say, "That's where it went wrong." But gradually, quietly, like something tightening around you, without you realizing it. And the worst part? It didn't feel like control. It felt like effort. Your effort. Trying to understand them, trying to keep things stable, trying to not mess it up. But what you were really doing was adapting to inconsistency. Again. And every time something felt off, that voice inside you showed up. Not loud, not aggressive, just convincing enough. You're overthinking. It's not that serious. Don't ruin this. And you listened. Because that voice feels like you, but it isn't always protecting you. Sometimes it's protecting the pattern. Slow, unsettling realization. That's why you stayed longer than you should have. Not because you didn't see the signs, but because every sign was something you had already learned to tolerate. Distance, silence, mixed signals, emotional inconsistency. None of it was new. So none of it stopped you. Instead, it pulled you in deeper. Because part of you believed, if I just get this right, everything will finally feel stable. But that stability never came. Just moments of it. Short bursts of warmth, followed by confusion, followed by effort, followed by doubt. And then a little more warmth again. Just enough to keep you there. That's not love. That's conditioning. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because right now, part of you still wants to defend it, still wants to say, no, it was real. And maybe parts of it were. But that doesn't change the pattern, because something can feel real and still be built on something you were trained to accept. That's why it's so hard to let go. Not because they were everything, but because the pattern feels like everything you've known. So before you ask, why do I miss them? Ask something more dangerous. Why did it feel normal to stay? So let's not drag this out. You already feel it. That uncomfortable truth sitting quietly in the background. The one you keep trying to soften. Why did it feel normal to stay? Because somewhere before them, staying became your strategy. Not happiness, not peace, survival. You weren't taught what love feels like. You were taught what you had to do to keep it. And those are not the same thing. And because real love doesn't train you to monitor someone's mood, overanalyze their silence, earn basic attention, shrink yourself to avoid conflict. But conditioning does. Conditioning teaches you, if you adjust enough, you'll be chosen. So you adjusted. You became easier, quieter, more understanding, less demanding, more patient. And every time you did that, you got something in return. Not consistency, not stability, but just enough to keep going. A reply, a moment, a look, a version of them that felt like everything you were waiting for. And your brain locked onto that. Not the inconsistency, not the confusion, but the relief. Because relief feels powerful. When you've been sitting in discomfort, that's the trap. You weren't addicted to them. You were addicted to the relief they gave you after the tension they created. Read that again in your mind, because that changes everything. It means the connection wasn't built on stability. It was built on contrast. High, low, warm, cold, close, distant. And your nervous system adapted to that rhythm. So when things were calm, it didn't feel safe. It felt unfamiliar, almost boring. And this is where it goes deeper than them. Because now, even without them, that pattern is still active. You replay conversations, you imagine scenarios, you question yourself, not because they're still doing something, but because your mind is still running the loop. That's why moving on feels strange. Because you're not just letting go of a person. You're letting go of a pattern that once helped you survive. And your brain doesn't like that. It doesn't care if something is healthy. It cares if something is familiar. So let's be honest. If they came back right now, without changing anything, would it really be different? Or would you fall back into the same rhythm, the same adjustments, the same justifications, the same quiet discomfort you kept ignoring? You already know the answer. So the question isn't, why did they treat me like that? The real question is, why did it feel normal? To accept it? Because until you answer that, you'll keep finding different people who trigger the same pattern. Different face, same feeling, different beginning, same ending. And no, awareness doesn't fix it instantly. You don't suddenly wake up and become a completely different person. You still feel the pull. You still feel the urge to explain, chase, fix, stay. That doesn't disappear overnight, because this isn't just a mindset, it's wiring. But awareness does something else. It creates a pause, a small gap, between what you feel and what you do next. And in that gap is where everything starts to change. You notice more, you react less, you question things you used to ignore, and slowly, the pattern stops running automatically. Not because you forced it, but because you saw it clearly, without trying to justify it, without trying to romanticize it, without trying to turn it into something it's not. Because once you see a pattern for what it is, it loses its power to disguise itself as love. And that's the moment everything shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. You stop chasing what confuses you. You stop holding on to what drains you. You stop calling something deep just because it feels intense. And maybe, for the first time, you start choosing what feels calm. Not because it's exciting, but because it's real. So no, you didn't fall in love. You followed something that felt familiar. But now you see it. And once you see it, you don't have to follow it anymore.